Like to speak in defense of the work of Dr. Ivan van Sertima. Dr. Ivan van Sertima was born in Guyana, South America. He graduated with honors from London University School of Oriental and African Studies. He was a tenured professor at Africana Studies at Rutgers University. Dr. van Sertima was distinguished as a linguist and anthropologist. Van Sertima argued a pre-Columbian Black African presence and influence in the Americas in his book entitled They Came Before Columbus, African Presence in Early America. To set the backdrop, I'd like to focus your attention on the Abydos ships found about 8 miles from the shore of the Nile, along the Nile. If you look at the picture on the right, you can see people standing down there and compare them to the building structures that you see. And then look at the picture of the remains of the ships. And you see about 7 or 8 ships there that are remains that are what are called the Abydos ships. The ships are around 75 or more feet long. And if you delve into and look at the Abydos ships, which you come to understand is that they use something called the marine chronometer. So they had the capacity to navigate out on the ocean. And they were, in fact, a seafaring group of people. And this is hard evidence of their ability to seafaring dating back to 2920 BC in the Nile Valley in ancient Egypt. And Abydos, of course, is closer to the south in May, and some scholars place it in Nubia, and where the first dynasty, the leaders of the first 14 dynasties come out of the south in what would be called Upper Egypt, which included part of Nubia. So it's important to recognize and put this in context to see that in the Americas, what you have at that time, the most that you have are dugouts. You have trees that have been cut down and hollowed out as ships. So you don't have this level of technology and sophistication back during that time in terms of seafaring capability, but you have this capability here in the Nile Valley. And so the possibility that, the people from the Nile Valley travel to the Americas is more likely than not, so when we begin to actually look at the evidence. So Dr. Van Sertima stood with a pioneering generation of Afrocentric scholars that challenged the false paradigm of white supremacy. Jose Serrano in 1862, after observing the Olmec heads, said, what most impressed me was the Ethiopian type it represents. I reflected upon it, and indubitably there had been blacks in this country, and it had been during the earliest ages of the world. If we go back and look at some of the foundation of Dr. Van Sertima's work, and remember he's a linguist by part of his profession, Professor Leo Wiener in 1922 published a book called Africa and the Discovery of America, where he laid out linguistic evidence and other evidence supporting the proposition that Africans had discovered America long before Columbus. In addition to that, Dr. Walter Neves, who's a distinguished Brazilian professor from the University of Sao Paulo, discredited with the discovery of Louisa, the forerunner of the modern uh, Native American population. Discovery from 13,000 years ago. Discovered this in 1975, claimed that Louisa had typical African craniometric measures. The Neves and Strauss collection of skeletal remains was destroyed in a mysterious fire in Rio de Janeiro National Museum before DNA testing could be completed. Andreas Wierzyński was a Polish craniologist and anthropologist and ethnologist ethnologist from the University of Warsaw. He claimed that the Olmecs were of African origin. He concluded that 14% of the Olmec skeletons found and examined were African. The Olmec DNA analysis. There's a Dr. Maria Moreno and Miguel Galena. They did a pioneering study of the Olmecs, and they conducted research specifically. They analyzed mitochondrial DNA from two purported Olmec remains found in San Lorenzo and Loma del Zapote sites, identifying a distinctive A haplogroup lineage in both individuals, which connected them to indigenous Native Americans. So their argument was that because of mDNA analysis, that the Olmecs were in fact indigenous Native Americans that descend from Louisa, and that they are part of the same group of people that exist there today. The problem with the issue with their research is that they focus exclusively on mDNA or mitochondrial DNA, when in fact mitochondrial DNA only tracks the mother's line of descendancy through the mother. So the male influence is completely excluded. And what we have is if we have seafaring Africans, they're more likely males that have come to the Americas and interacted with the indigenous Native Americans and produced offspring. And so in the absence of having Y DNA for this study, the study's actually irrelevant. It's not evidence to say that the Olmecs were not or did not have any type of African connection. But when we overall look at the newly generated data, there's a non-Native American admixture, which we can see in certain populations that show various levels of African ancestry. And these predate, Columbus and the slave trade. So there's the DNA evidence actually supports the existence of an African presence in early America. Some of Van Sertima's critics, like Dwayne Wong, argues that Van Sertima's work is not valid. He claims that Van Sertima used secondary sources, but in reality, none of Columbus's ship logs actually currently survive. The only surviving document is Bartholomew de la Casa's written abstract of the original that was dated 1530. So when we began to really look at the evidence, the available source, the most authentic source that was available, Dr. Van Sertima used that source. And so Dwayne Wong just basically is spouting misinformation regarding the work of Van Sertima. De la Casa's reports Columbus documented reports of Blacks coming from the South in ships trading gold-tipped spears. Columbus sent samples obtained from natives back to Spain for assay analysis, which compared the composition to known African spears and concluded that they were, in fact, Africans. And so de la Casa reported that Columbus reported Native Americans called the gold-tip spears guanin, which is the same word the West Africans of the Gold Coast people use for gold. So Van Sertima's critics also, criticize other evidence, such as Van Sertima reported the 14th century West African Mali king Abubakari to his Atlantic voyage is contained in the 14th century writing of the Arab historian Al-Umari. So this is a documented independent source that Van Sertima used. So to say that it's not a valid source is just, it's not good scholarship. Van Sertima's work had valid sources and demonstrated excellent scholarship, but his critic, Glenn Daniel, called Van Sertima's work ignorant rubbish. Daniels claimed that Van Sertima badly argued theories based on fantasies. The real issue is that Van Sertima challenged the paradigm of YT superiority based on evidence that is yet to be scientifically refuted. Van Sertima's critics resorted to personal attacks and thin, unsupported scientific arguments. Van Sertima and Dr. Diop presented us a challenge. Dr. Van Sertima said that which happened in the past and that which we believe happened in the past conditions the living present and therefore the future. So he said history is not a dead thing. And Professor Diop said we must rescue and reconstruct Black history based upon clear evidence, not in a protest posture, but based upon verifiable facts and subject to the scrutiny of valid scientific method. So I wanted to just share that information regarding Dr. Van Sertima to help clear up the record for many who may be confused.